Okay. Hello to everybody here. My name is Wolfram von Heinitz. I'm the Deputy Consul General here in New York, and I welcome you very much to Pathways for Funding, a joint project of the University Alliance Ruhr, of the German Science of Innovation Hub here in New York, and of the project Worldfactory of the Ruhr University in Bochum. And the aim today is, figuratively speaking, to convert you from a fan of Udo Jürgens, ich war noch niemals in New York, to a fan of Frank Sinatra. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. Udo Jürgens, for the non-German speakers of us, and no mistake if you don't know him, he's a German singer who's one of his most famous songs is about a man who lives in Germany and always dreams about New York, but never goes, at least not till the end of the song. Well, back to Frank Sinatra, if you can make it here. And I would say that's a big if, not a scary if, but a big if, because there's fierce competition in New York, fierce competition for talent, fierce competition for financing, of course, and a fierce competition in the market, in which market you're ever in or aiming at. I've never seen another place where startup companies in particular burn through capital as fast as here. And it's quite visible even for consumer in the city here, because from the consumer perspective, you have offers that are not reliable in the long term, and you see that here. So fierce competition, but also the biggest access to customers, but also to finance than anywhere else in the world. Customers, of course, you have a unified market. It's much more unified, regulated than the European market, despite the European Union and all the progress we made. It's cultural, more unified, so it's easier to grow here if you have a successful idea, a successful business. If you want to grow, that's probably easier and faster possible here. It's also easier to get financing, particularly, or not easier, the market is bigger to get financing, particularly for growth financing, ABC rounds, and so on. So that's one of the other advantages here. The last thing I want to mention in this regard is also, if you look at your access strategy, there are more opportunities here. If you look for partners, if you want to sell, and you make yourself noticed in the US, you probably will get more offers than when you stay local in Germany or in Europe. And if your final exit strategy is to go public, I mean, the death of the US stock market is probably bigger than anything else in the world. So some pros and some disadvantages if you go here, but in general, we want to encourage you to look for cooperation. Also because German, European companies have startups have a very good reputation here, particularly the very grounded and substantial approach. A lot of you probably following that is something that's very much appreciated here, particularly I have to say on the East Coast, and we probably hear about that a little bit later on more. There's a difference, I think, between the West Coast and the East Coast of the US, and if you look here at the East Coast, this is something that is very much appreciated here. But if you follow this grounded approach, you're looking for practical advice, and we have a lot of experts today who can give that to you much better than I can. So I will hand over to the first speaker, and the first speaker is Mark Philemon, the managing partner at the German Accelerator Life Science here in New York or in the US, and one of the leading experts for everything connected to the German startup scene with the US ecosystem. Mark, I hand over to you, and once again, welcome to all of you.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. And though I live in Boston right now, my heart is definitely New York City, where I was born and raised. So welcome, everybody. We've got what promises to be a very nice and informative and relevant lineup today of people talking about getting funding and de-risking in general from multiple perspectives. So we'll do this in a general room and then have some breakouts. But I guess I've been asked to make a 5-minute impact statement, an impactful 5 minutes. And so I will endeavor to do that with the aid of some slides. So before I start, just congratulations. You guys are entrepreneurs, you are budding entrepreneurs, been in corporate for many years and in an entrepreneurial life for many years, and I wouldn't have it anyway. So you guys were going to go out, you're going to create, you're going to take risks, you're going to live this impassioned, empowered life, and you can change the world. And that is God's honest truth. But funding is an important part of that. So I've got 5 quick tips for you to getting funding. First is approach the right type of investor at the right time. You're not going to go from a university to a VC. That is not typical. But fortunately, there are a plethora of different funding sources available to you at multiple stages in your entrepreneurial journey and in the life of your startup. So in general, VCs don't invest for de-risking and validation, which is all that happens over here in kind of the prototype and early launch. But every person eating food at a barbecue that's a friend and family is a potential source of money. So there's lots of available funding to you in the early rounds, grants, etc. Please take advantage of that. Second thing is, as was discussed, have an international perspective right from the start. Competition is everywhere, partners are everywhere, and exit opportunities are everywhere. So having this international perspective right from the get-go is extremely important. Third, understand that getting VC funding is actually hard. There's a lot of free cash right now, particularly in the investment community and the VC community, but it's hard. And less than 1% of ventures get funded. I'm working with actually a couple of angel groups, health tech angel groups in the Boston area. And last year, one of the groups saw 1,800 decks, 1,800 decks, and we invested in 5. 5 over 1,800. Small. Investor starting point is, no, I'm not going to invest in you because I've got so many more behind you. I've got other opportunities. US investors also invest in validated businesses, not necessarily just in cool tech. There has to be a business associated with it. So keep that in mind. And understand fundamentally what investors care about most. And there's an obvious answer to what investors care about most. And it's obviously looking good in fleece and sneakers, because ultimately that's the only thing that matters. Totally joking. Obviously, they care about reducing risk in order to maximize their return. That's not reducing risk because, you know, there aren't any big risks or big opportunities. It's just you've got to mitigate them to the maximum degree possible. You've got to, you as the startup, have to define this pathway between the business and their returns, because after all, it's not about you. It's about them and their returns as investors. So reduce your biggest risks first, right? These are typically, with some notable tech platform assumptions, the customer and the market risks. So do that first. Those are the biggest risks. Okay. You do that through validation, validating what problem you're trying to solve, who your customers are, what are the benefits, and what are the adoption hurdles, i.e. what's the value proposition. Okay, so German Accelerator can help. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the breakout session. But that, I think, is about my 5 minutes. So welcome. And these are my little 5 tips to remember. Hopefully that was helpful. And next, oh, geez, I'm sorry. Who's up next? I'm sorry. I forgot the order.
I think I'm next.
Yeah,
Okay.
Tim is next.
All right. Thanks all, Mark. That was excellent. I couldn't really, say it myself better as a venture capitalist. I'll have a different view. So I looked for my talk how we're doing in venture capital funding in Germany, because the narrative generally suggests that Germany is lagging behind its European neighbors when it comes to building a globally competitive venture capital market. But the numbers actually tell a different story, which is great. So in 2021, German startups raised 16.5 billion euros. In comparison, let's take France, which is sort of similar size, similar GDP, which came in at 9.9 billion euros. And the situation was also pretty good in 2020. So I think we actually have a healthy blend of local and international investments flowing into the early stage markets in Germany. I think that great innovation is actually being sourced and backed by local funds. German funds dominate the investment in German startups at the seed and Series A stages, but we see that as companies grow, overseas investment plays a huge part, because statistics say that half of the deals exceeding sort of $50 million or so funding rounds are led entirely by foreign investors, while only around 5% are run by only German investors, and 45% see a mix of foreign and domestic investors at the cap table. But I think that, as our venture capital market in Germany matures, I am confident that we will see more German VC money being invested at the growth stages. So I think we're still in the early stages of our story. And the outlook, I think it is also favorable. It's a thriving market. Even the pandemic had little impact on our positive trend for the technology sector. I mean, my little fund managed to do 6 investments in the Corona pandemic years. So that's awesome. Germany is famous all over the world for its manufacturing and engineering sector, and these sectors are still yet to experience a massive leap in innovation. So we have some way to go. And then in addition to that, I also see that the policymakers are committing to creating better conditions for startups and VC funds to thrive in Germany. We have a new government. It's a little bit more business and startup friendly. We're looking forward to the changes that they're going to introduce. And then the federal government also injects money into this innovative startup scene. So there was the 10 billion euro future fund that's been announced. And then there is also the Deep Tech Future Fund, also by the German federal government. Again, this injects more capital into the very needed growth stage, but it also indicates that Germany is open for business. It sends a good, clear signal to the rest of the world. Germany understands the link between innovation and tangible improvements to society. It's a powerful and welcome indicator to funds from all around the world. So that was the rosy part. So what I also observe is not the so rosy part of my assessment. So fintech software, I don't know, next delivery service seems to be really well financed, and that's great. I love it. But the area that interests me are these hard science or deep tech startups, whatever term you choose to use. So in my fund, we invest in synthetic biology, chemistry, life sciences, materials startups. And so every time the check size is a little bigger and we know that we will need co-investors, I get this really uneasy feeling, how are we going to find additional investors? Who will invest? How will we find them? Is the message from the founders clear enough? Do we have a good story? And why? Because, well, apart from a few well-known big investors, the market for hard science startups in Germany is really hard. Fair enough, the due diligence can be hard if you're not an expert in a science area. And I also think that for example, for software as a service, the whole journey is pretty well documented. You know the metrics you need in terms of growth or what a good growth looks like, customer retention, monetization looks like, when they should hire, when they should go international. Whereas for hard science or deep tech startups, they cover so many different areas, and occasionally the stage before you get to something to market is so much longer. When I look at the other side of the pond, I see some really good investors, though, that have figured out how to do deep tech investments, and they have really good investment strategies or, let's say, teasers. They know that scientists are rarely trained as entrepreneurs, and companies founded by scientists are trying to advance the science, create a business model, and find customers while simultaneously growing and running the company, and all of this at the same time. And this is hard. So to sort of wrap up my impulse talk, all of this leaves me with two thoughts. I think that if entrepreneurs are unable to find investors at home, they can and they should think outside the box, and they have to speak with international investors. It needs a little bit of tweaking, I think, how you communicate the message. But I know that German scientists, entrepreneurs have a lot to offer. Circling it back to my initial points, we have excellent research and we have excellent researchers. And secondly, we also sort of, I think, maybe assess our own funding structures. I mean, if well-known VC powerhouses from the US have figured out we also need to build stuff for future, not just software, and that needs patient capital, we can also take the same view carefully in Germany. So yeah, that is all I wanted to say for my impulse talk, and I am apparently handing to Oscar.
Thank you, everybody. This is great. This is fascinating. I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Oscar Romero. I am the Director of Inclusive Innovation and International Cooperation at the New York City Mayor's Office of the Chief Technology Officers. I'm going to bring a bit of a different perspective. What is the local government take on this? So let me share my screen. Let's see. Can you see my screen? Yes, perfect. Well, the one message I want to share with you all is that local governments can, and I will argue should, be your partners as you go into this entrepreneurship journey. Currently, it is estimated that more than half of the world's population live in cities. And it is estimated that by 2050, that is going to be about 70% of the world's population. If you want to see a map of how that looks like, all of the purple dots here are the cities that have more than 10 million people, or the green ones are 1 to 5 million people, and the blue ones are 5 to 10 million people, metropolitan areas. So that is a map from 2018. This is the estimate for 2030. A dramatic increase, mostly Southeast Asia, Latin America, lots of cities in Africa, but certainly across Europe and the United States, you're gonna see a massive increase of metropolitan areas. So what this means is that city governments are going to have to deal with bigger problems than they ever had to deal before, in a way that they were just simply not built to address. Whatever you're talking about, whether it is climate resiliency, whether it is housing problems, whether it is transportation, whether it is cybersecurity, name it, all of that we're going to have to figure out, and we were not built to do that. So that's a massive opportunity for folks. Now, this increase is not only in scale, it's also in complexity. You're going to have migration flows happening. So this is a map of the foreign-born populations in some of these global cities. In New York City, to give you a sense, this is from 2015. Currently, it's more than 40% of the population that is foreign-born. That means we have, as a city, 9 official languages. Queens is the most diverse place in the world. So that is hard. That is very complicated to govern. That is very complicated to serve. And that, again, opens lots of opportunities for folks to actually think about internationalization in a way more expanded way than it had ever been before in the world. Now, this means is that we have a lot of problems, and we don't have nearly the resources to address these problems. A city like New York, well, New York City has 300,000 employees and a budget of $96 billion a year. But I can assure you, even with that amount of money and those resources, we simply don't have enough to address all the problems that we have. If you're an entrepreneur and you care about an issue, whatever issue that is, chances are you're doing your due diligence, you're doing research, whatever you bring to the table helps. Do not wait to the moment when you want to make government your client, which, by the way, depending on what you do, could be a horrible client. Reach out to government earlier. Then new problems demand new talent. There's just simply ways in which we can't continue to operate and do the things. Like when I get a government agency telling me that they're working on children protection, and they don't know what TikTok is, then I wonder, can you really do that? So, suddenly you have a bunch of folks that are working on very important things, for instance, to prevent harassment, to prevent abuse, to prevent all sorts of things that have no idea that people talk in video games. So, to put it mildly, to explain things, we need new people that have new approaches. Don't feel like your ideas are something that you haven't seen before. Chances are you haven't seen it because we haven't done it. Yes, that helps. Bring it, talk about things. Then the other thing is, a lot of these challenges that I'm talking about in all the areas that I just mentioned are opportunities for entrepreneurship. Governments, increasingly, especially municipal governments, are creating innovation challenges, are creating innovation funds, are creating incubators that are actually actively competing to attract startups. You will find funds at the state level, at the federal level, definitely international aid organizations and development organizations. So keep an eye for those and try to actively participate in those. It doesn't matter if you are at the idea stage, at the incubator stage, or in a moment of actually trying to test a pilot or go to scale. There are opportunities for you in all the different stages that you might find yourself. So if I have to give you 3 pieces of advice for how to make government your partner, the first thing I will say is reach out. You don't have to wait until you want to sell government something. Government can give you ideas. You can talk to them. You can find the experts. You can find the scientists. You can see how a problem looks like, not only to this government, but to many other municipal governments. The more governments you talk to, the more interesting you become. And then there's more chances that you can actually, be supported. You can get to know people know funds. They can support you in a variety of ways, not only money, not only as your client, not only with a pilot project. Be confident. You're creating something new. You have to find confidence in your commitment to make a change in the issue where you want to make a change. You have to confidently reach out. You have to say you care about something. And you also have to confidently accept what you don't know. But that makes all the difference. If you don't reach out, if you don't believe in your product, if you don't believe in that you can find an answer to a thing that is hard, then we're not going to believe in you either. Then the next thing is be kind to yourself. As an entrepreneur, chances are you're going to have to pivot and change your product, your business model, your entire organization, the people that you partner with. Lots of things are going to have to change. And some people might have the privilege to actually pivot their entire operation. Some people might have to go and get a job because you have to pay the bills. Whatever you do, be committed to the mission that you have and not necessarily a particular form of your organization at this moment. It is going to change. It's okay. You're going to continue to find opportunities and you're going to be impactful. Those are my 5 minutes. So I think, I don't know who I should pass it on to, but please take it away.
Femian. Fantastic.
Sergey, yeah, is not here, right? So I'm next. So hello, everyone. My name is Fermin Fernandez, and I am the managing director of the Chicago Connectory. It's very nice to see so many people from New York. I normally speak with a lot of people from Chicago or the Midwest, but what I have to say, something interesting about the U.S. is exactly this diversity, also regionally, where we have, of course, a lot of investments in the West and the East Coast. But the Midwest plays a very interesting role in the whole landscape of innovation around the U.S. And I have a little small story to illustrate this. But before I go into that, I would like to also add to the perspective that you got from the government side, from Oscar and from Mark and Pelin in terms of, she works in a VC or as an investor. And at the end of the day, in terms of organizations like in Germany and in other countries that are supporting startups, you have another aspect in the side of corporations. So I work for a company, Bosch, which I'm assuming everyone knows in this forum, and this is another source for you as entrepreneurs of 2 things. One of them is, of course, investment in the sense of having Bosch has programs, and many corporates have programs to allow entrepreneurs that have ideas and businesses around topics that are interesting for a company like Bosch, and you can participate in these programs and you will get some funding to develop your idea. I will share with you one of these programs is called Startup Harbor, and this is a joint program in Berlin between Bosch and the government of Berlin. And there are funds available for the entrepreneurs that are accepted in this program. But the interesting aspect about that is that many of these startups end up having a pilot in one of the Bosch locations. Could be in Europe or it could be around the world. And this is brings me to my key message that I want to put in front of you. Sometimes it's more important to place yourself in an innovation ecosystem that is more relevant to what you do. What I've seen is that there are some companies or some startups that are trying to get funding no matter what, but they ended up maybe getting an investment from an area that is that has not a big affinity with what they do. So I think you have a better chance to get not the funding, but also the right partners in funding if you start getting yourselves connected in the right innovation ecosystem. And this is what we have in Chicago at the moment. In Chicago, what we have is a lot of incubators and programs that are industry specific. And one of them is the Chicago Connectory. We are specialized in Internet of Things. So if you're a startup and you have an idea that has to do with Internet of Things, you have a good opportunity to meet the relevant people and VCs and the people that mentors that can help you grow your idea and even fund your idea if you talk to the people in the community around the Chicago Connectory. So this is the part where it's very complex to be an entrepreneur right now, because there are so many options, right? It's like going to a supermarket and there are like a million brands of coffee, right? So think about that as you go about your journey, and think about corporations also as potential places for you to find funding as well. So I will close my 5 minutes with a small story that I had about New York. So I went to New York actually about 5 months ago, and I went because a very good friend of mine invited me to be a mentor in one of his startup program there, where they had startups from Korea. And I sat down with a few of these startups, and they were trying to learn more about Bosch, and they were very happy. They were meeting a lot of people in New York, but a couple of them were working in industrial solutions for maybe industries like Bosch, who have production plants, and they had some of these solutions. And I was telling them, this is great. You can get a lot of opportunities maybe for funding in New York, but you're a little bit too far away from your customers and where your customers are. So what I suggested to many of them is spend some time in an area where your customers or your key customers are operating, so that you have better chances to have those conversations. And then of course, once you have a more mature idea, find where the opportunities are, and they could be international, etc. But innovation ecosystems are a very, very powerful way to cut time in your development. If you find the right place to be, in the right environment, let's say, and sometimes this could be maybe Berlin, maybe it could be Brazil, maybe it could be Mexico, maybe it could be Chicago, New York, Boston, whatever. But this is a very important decision that you have to take as you decide about that. So I think that's my 5 minutes, and yeah, looking forward to talking our breakout today.
Thank you, Fermin. And I'd like to invite Christian.
Yes, so I'll focus on what we do at German Accelerator, and I think what's interesting for you in terms of fundraising. So I'm the managing partner for German Accelerator. That's not life sciences. I run our services, our offices in New York and Silicon Valley. Next slide. And just as a quick background, so German Accelerator, we have over 500 alumni. We've raised probably way more than 5 billion even right now. Some of our alumni you would know, Celonis is now $11 billion decacorn, and others like Forto, Signavio, which was sold to SAP. So in our 10 years, we've really made a big impact on I think the German startup scene. Okay, next one. So a little bit piggybacking on what Wolf was saying in the beginning, why should you go to the US? Largest homogeneous market in Western world. Tech is thriving. Obviously, during a pandemic, e-commerce has made a leap, and notwithstanding what's been going on in the public markets the last couple of weeks, IPOs have been booming, tech IPOs have been booming, and I still think that's going to continue, especially as we move to what's going on in the fintech sector, what's going on with blockchain, Web3. So much of that is coming. And I think what's specifically interesting in Germany is, obviously with the new government there, and there's a general strong focus on climate. We just had a climate badge in Q4 at the German Accelerator for climate focused startups, which was super successful. So we're really excited about them. We think there's a big opportunity, and I think a little bit also what others were saying, there's what I call significant valuation arbitrage compared to Europe in terms of valuation in the US. So you can come, as a European investor, there's an opportunity to get a better outcome if your next rounds are raised here. And then always what I'd like to emphasize, think big. So here are my key fundraising points. Now, and obviously Mark pointed out a few of those things, right? You need to solve an urgent problem. for your customer in order to have a successful business, right? Urgent means this is something that keeps your customer up at night today. So you don't have to explain to them why they have a problem. They already must know that they have a problem and desperately looking for a solution. If somebody is pausing their day, a great product guy from Stripe was saying that to me last week, if they're willing to pause their day to listen to you, then you might have something that you can raise money on. And you will not raise money from professional investors for a product or solution in search of a problem. So especially for you, people coming out of university or having developed something, right? What matters is, as Mark said, is them, not you, right? And as you think about getting your investors on board, think about how you choose your investors, because often as you grow the company, it gets tricky if you don't have the right investors in early. Easier said than done, but still focus on it. The other thing I would say is the private market environment is a sort of pointing a harsh glare on your business. So to be able to survive and thrive, it's a little bit different from being in an academic environment, and make sure you're ready for that, and make sure you're okay with the fact that once you go beyond an angel or seeds round, you know, it's really all about metrics. It's really all about numbers. And nobody wants to hear your story anymore, or your product, or why you're doing what you're doing. The question is, can you make people a lot of money? And then they'll be interested. As you think about where to raise money, American investors are usually more aggressive than European investors, Silicon Valley investors more aggressive than New York investors. What I mean by that is, how much money are they willing to put to work in general? How much money for your company? How much money per round? And what risk are they willing to take, and what outcomes are they seeking? Meaning Silicon Valley traditionally is more about still changing the world, doing a $30 million seed round for 3 students coming out of Stanford. That's not really happening in New York as much. It's definitely not happening in Europe, I believe. So think about that. And then, you know, there's different ways to raise money from different people. So it's not just the VC world, it's not just the typical angels. There's family offices, private equity is starting to trend down into venture capital. So it's an interesting environment. Okay. So one lesson is you really need to do your homework, and let's go to the next slide. So this is something, I'm not going to go through all these slides because we don't have the time, but I will that as a leave behind. We put something together at German Accelerator, what it takes to actually do a fundraising round, and what's a structured process to do it, because it is a structured process. So this and the next slides are really describing that. We're going to happily share this deck. Hopefully that will help you. You have to build an investor pipeline. You have to have a spreadsheet. You have to look for intros. You have to see how it is an involved process. And when you follow an involved process, you will also succeed if you are solving an urgent problem. And that is one of the things we're trying to help our companies with. And so we've developed a strategy here, but that also draws on a lot of additional good outside resources from people like Y Combinator and others. And we're happy to share that. And we've also included some slides on German Accelerator and German entrepreneurship. And looking forward to your questions in breakout session. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. I'll pass on the floor to Wolfram to say a few words. Thank you so much, Christian.
Thanks. Yeah. So this is the commentary section, and I will keep it really short because I think that was excellent what we heard, and it was a good start. I don't want to interrupt this. Just a short commentary. I have 2 takeaways from the last session. One is think internationally, and internationally means global and locally at the same time, because look at the world is your playground basically, but also look at the differences and use what you can best use wherever it is in the world. And the second one is help us. Second message I take away from the first session is help is available, make use of that help. Help, we heard about the German Accelerator as one example. We heard about different funding programs. And by the way, there's a new funding focus now, I think also in Europe, also in Germany, on the growth phase. There's a new fund just about to be established by the government with government aid. But basically, interesting enough, the organizers and creators, actually, some of them at least, work here in the US. So it's also on that level an international cooperation. So make use of that help that is available and then find what is right for you. So this is basically my two takeaways from the first session. And with that, I hand over to Frederica. What do you make out of what we heard so far?
Thank you very much. Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Frederic Schneider. I'm the Deputy General Manager of the Horst Goertz Institute for IT Security located at the Ruhr University Bochum and the head of our startup program, Cube 5. So thank you very much for this great insights on financing in the US. And I feel very inspired. First of all, you don't have to convince people that they have a problem. They need to be aware of their problem. I think that's a great quote, Christian. I will definitely use this one from now onwards because working in IT security, this is a great slogan to put it together. But looking at all the inputs, maybe from a wider angle, I have to think of a theoretical approach that might help us putting it together. So I think the inputs were a good example of the varieties of capitalism theory from two political scientists, actually, Hall and Soskich. And so they separated liberal market economies and coordinated market economies. Probably I don't tell you anything new about it, but maybe just very briefly. So liberal market economies are characterized by venture capital, stock market, private investors, like the US, obviously. And so here radical innovation comes up. Big companies like Google, Facebook, you name it. So whereas in coordinated market economies like Germany, startups are usually financed by bank credits. Like incremental innovations usually come up. Very slow innovations are very like small steps, you could say. So Germany is a good example with very powerful small and medium-sized companies. So I wouldn't judge which one is better, but I would argue that both varieties have their justification. So like Philemon did earlier, I want to share a very brief example on our work at our startup program Cube 5, so which might sum it up or points it out quite well. So we have a German startup, they are struggling, and they were able to win an American CEO. So this was a great success, and so the American CEO, with a lot of experience in this field, tried to generate funding for this startup in Germany. So, and he was very shocked how difficult it was to attract investments. So he was, from his point of view, he couldn't understand why German investors didn't want to make any risk in their investments. So investors without risk, it was nonsense for him. So he quickly realized how the German investors worked and how different the markets were. So of course, different mindsets also play a very important role in this example, in this whole field. So what I observe in our work in Bochum is that we have a fusion of both varieties of capitalism nowadays. So like Pelin said earlier, we have a mix of national and international investors, for instance. Yeah, so having that said, what does it mean for your practice? Why do you need this theoretical background, maybe? So that's an interesting question. What can you take away from it? So I think I want to come back to something that Mark pointed out right at the beginning. Choose the right investor, and looking at it internationally, having an international perspective gives you more options and the option to take advantage from both worlds. So like summing it up, I want to come back to one aspect Oscar pointed out. Diversity offers options, and reach out and maybe reach out. And for Philemon, I think you said it in your presentation. Place yourself in the ecosystem which is fitting to you and take the best of both worlds, of both varieties. I'm looking forward to the further discussion in the breakout session. Thank you very much for this very inspiring inputs by you.
Thank you, Frederic. May I invite Christian to also comment?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, and good morning or good afternoon from cold Boston. I'm Christian Megel, founder of Venture Lane. I'm an entrepreneur and founded a couple of companies back in Europe, and IPO'd my last company actually in Australia before I came here to Boston 4 years ago, and started a startup hub for B2B software companies, helping early stage companies along. Now, given that I'm in Boston, like we deal with a lot of people coming from universities, having Harvard, MIT, Northeastern, Babson, all these schools, and 350,000 students in a city like Boston. And let me just summarize a little bit and maybe give you some tips, some that you heard already, to reiterate, and some maybe one or the other addition to that. Number one, I think, let's start out of this. This is like really the golden age of entrepreneurship and tech. I think it's never been more exciting, more opportunities. There are great needs here, but there's also plenty of capital and support. Never been better than this year. So this is a great opportunity. If you feel entrepreneurial spirit, go for it. This is the time to do it. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's exciting. The second thing is, I think Christian said this, really make sure you have a problem that you're solving. I see a lot of international companies coming here having a great solution, and they start with the solution first, but they don't have the problem that they're solving. That sometimes might make the difference whether you're working 5 years on getting it to the market, or get to funding, or maybe half a year or a year. So that's a big one. And I love what has been said before about embracing your being international. When I came here to the US, or I worked in Australia, I always thought like, well, maybe it's a disadvantage to have an international background. I think actually it is a great advantage if you really embrace this. Let me add on 4 more things. One is, and I think it's underestimated, if you want to start a business in the US or want to fundraise for something in the US, you most likely need to be over here and you need to be incorporated in the US. So this is not just a business decision. This is many times also a lifestyle decision. So think about that. The rewards are big, but of course, this is also a decision what you're willing to do. Second thing is, I think Mark said this before, and Christian too, fundraising is a campaign. Fundraising doesn't happen, you show up and you show a pitch deck to something. Fundraising is actually comes with a fundraising strategy. So knowing where you fit in, who to talk to, and what you're selling and what you're offering and what not, and talking to the right people is elemental for this, to kind of keep this window short. But for somebody who comes new from Germany here into the US, I would say calculate at least 6 months to kind of get any money in the bank. It might actually take a little longer. The fifth one is personality. If you want to be an entrepreneur, bring resilience, bring grit, bring passion, bring agility. You're gonna pivot maybe one or twice, or this is about like going with the currents and really being with the market and see what kind of feedbacks you get. Have that personality, or be that personality together with a co-founder, for example. And last but not least, get local help. Like there's, I think some people mentioned it. There's great accelerators, incubators, studios out there. Venture Lane here, we actually just launched our studio where we help people with go-to-market, fundraising, and really their operating system to prepare them to make the big step and go out there and really get traction with their product. They're by now, like, I started my entrepreneurship and my career in 1995. The times has really changed. There's a great group of mentors and entrepreneurs and supporters out there that are willing to help you. Happy to do that too. And looking forward to your questions in the round, or you reaching out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to have a chat with you. Thank you.